To lube or not to lube? This is the question we're going to be getting into in this week's newsletter episode. We're going to talk all about the physiology of female lubricant. We're going to talk about how women often don't feel easeful lubrication in their postpartum and menopausal periods. We're going to talk about things that optimize natural female lubrication. And we're also going to get into the use of artificial lube and when and why, if ever, this is something to be incorporated within our sexual health practices and our overall female pelvic health and well-being. All right, so this is a huge topic, which we'll just touch on today. But I want to start by saying I know that it's really charged and that a lot of women feel very strongly one way or the other. And then a lot of women have really strong responses when I suggest that maybe artificial lubricant is not really an optimal part of our overall sexual health and well-being. So if that's you, the first thing I want to say is I trust you, right? I trust you to know what it is that you need. I trust you to know what it is that is optimal for your body. I would never tell women what to do in their health, and certainly not in their sexual health or sex lives. So take this as an informational way to really tune into the brilliance of your female body and do with this information what you will. Okay, let's start with physiology. So our bodies are brilliant and they're designed to create lubrication within our cervical and vaginal tissues. Our vaginal wall is a mucosal membrane, which is naturally moist by design, just by the type of tissue. It's incredibly both innervated and vasculated and has a lot of lymphatic flow just by design within the pelvis from its physiological arrangement. And all of that movement of fluid from synovial fluid, lymphatic fluid, blood, all creates a moist environment within the mucosal membranes. So first thing is when we have healthy tissues, meaning our muscles fire, we have good blood flow, we're minimizing fascial adhesions, we have good biomechanics, we are, circulating our lymph all throughout our pelvis, really optimizing our pelvic health, which I talk about in a variety of capacities from a structural and a movement and a bodywork based perspective. That has a huge impact on our ability for these tissues to remain hydrated and lubricated, right? So optimizing our pelvic health overall, moving for the female body, having healthy respiration impacts our capacity for lubrication. So just know that as we're going through things that are going to be supporting natural lubrication, or if you're struggling with lubrication, just something to consider. All right. So other than the naturally moist environment of our vaginal walls, of those mucosal membranes, we have two other primary types of secretions, one which are cervical secretions and the other which is vaginal secretions. We have glands all in and around our cervix that secrete secretions, right, that secrete different fluids that vary throughout our menstrual cycle. And they also vary even if you're not cycling. So I'm thinking in your postpartum period or in menopause. And these secretions have various different functions. Some of them are hospitable or inhospitable to sperm and therefore affect our fertility at different types of points in our cycle. But they are also responsive to our overall hormonal blueprint. So think about our levels of adrenaline or cortisol or catecholamines, right? All of these stress hormones are going to affect our cervical secretions, both in quantity and type. Also, things like arousal, so an increase in oxytocin or prolactin or relaxin or other hormones that are generally increased in an arousal response are all also going to affect our cervical secretions. Why do I start talking about this? So when we start to understand that the hormonal fluctuations that happen within our body, within our cycle, depending where we are in a cycle and where we are along our sort of continuum in our female life, that all has an impact on the type of secretions that we make. And while that impact, often from what I would argue is a misogynist perspective, is utilized to say, oh, well, this is why I can't create lubrication in times where I am maybe having impacts or shifts to my hormonal blueprint, think postpartum or menopause. Therefore, the inverse is also true. When we're supporting that hormonal fluctuation in our hormonal blueprint and balance, we therefore can optimize that system to create lubrication no matter where we are in our continuum. Okay, so cervical secretions, that's one. Number two is our vaginal secretions. We spoke about the vaginal wall secretions from the mucosal membranes. And now we're going to talk about secretions from our Bartholin's glands and from our Skene's glands. These are two types of glands that are closer to the vulva or the entrance of the vaginal canal. So our Bartholin's glands kind of sit on either side, right and left, and these are specifically glands that create and release um, arousal fluid, excuse me. So when we have the elevation of various hormones throughout arousal, that filters all the way through our bloodstream and down into our pelvic bowl, and then stimulates the release of these secretions that add to female lubrication. The same is true for our Skene's glands, which surround our urethra, right? And they also release sexually arousable secretions, or secretions that come with sexual arousal. So let's talk a little bit about arousal and the time that that process takes. So you've probably heard me say this, maybe you've heard this, that it can take, 30 to 60 minutes for women to reach arousal. And what we're talking about is the actual hormonal exchange that needs to happen and the barriers for that hormonal exchange needing to come down in order for those hormones to filter all the way through the system to then create the physiological response that then allows for those secretions to occur. So let's talk about this in real time. If I'm like, like a lot of other people, and I maybe have to schedule sex with my husband because we have busy schedules and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm not in the mood, but this is the time that we have. Okay, so what does that look like? There might be a lot of layers that have to come down of just like what's on my mind, sort of emotional bonding, like clearing the way, so to speak, to have a sense of heartfelt connection, to then have that sense of relaxation and a lack of awkwardness, to then have that arousal then be able to occur from a hormonal level, and then the time that then takes to have the physiological response to create those secretions, right? That can take time. And on average, before we can become fully lubricated, we're looking at 30 to 60 minutes, which is a long time, right? And so what would it look like if we actually took, say, a full hour, specifically if you're in your postpartum or your menopausal period, when it takes, when you are in those moments of, to be more varied hormonal blueprint, right? So you're going to want to be giving yourself more time and more support for that hormonal exchange. In most cases, I'm not saying for all women, but I talk to women about this a lot. For a lot of women, when we spend the time to address the interpersonal aspects of what's going on in our primary relationship, we're sure that we actually do want to be having sex with the person that we're having sex with at that time. We sort of clear the way, clean the glass, so to speak, in order to not have any kind of emotional barrier between us that's going to allow for that hormonal exchange to occur and then allow it to filter through our tissues to create that arousal response. More often than not, women that have struggled with having that wetness or having that natural lubrication can find support through going through that process. So that is something I really want to share. Now, say you're like, I have a baby and I've got 15 minutes and I want to have a quickie with my man or whatever. I'm never about to say don't do that. You obviously know what's best for you and your family and your sex life. And if artificial lubricant is what you need in order to make that happen, I'm not there to knock that. I just want us to not then think, oh, I can't become lubricated. And so therefore I have to use lube. And it becomes part of this sort of crutch and band aid rather than actually stimulating that natural lubrication system. There's also something to be said where the more frequently we go through that hormonal exchange, the more frequently we go through the neurological patterns of arousal, the more easeful they become. So, the more sex we're having or the more times we're spending aroused, often the easier that arousal becomes subsequently. So, if we're skipping that entire process from a physiological perspective and bypassing it using natural lubricant, often we can be shortchanging our ability to then become more easily lubricated the next time. Now, all of this, none of this is a life sentence. All of it can be, repatterned because we're forever fluctuating and changing, which is the brilliance of our female physiology. But this is how it can start to feel like, oh, I always need lube, and how we can start to unravel that specific pattern. Okay, so you have cervical secretions, vaginal secretions. We talked about the structural aspects that allow them to be supported, the emotional aspects that allow them to be supported, the temporal aspects that allow them to be supported. And now let's talk about some of the myths, like I can't become lubricated during my postpartum or perimenopausal period. One, I think this has as much to do with misogynistic views of when women are sexual and when they're not. Women decide for themselves when they're sexual and when they're not societal overarching sort of narratives. So I think there is a lot saying that women are not at their apex sexuality in their postpartum period. I have heard really on all sides of the spectrum on that, and that's for you to really decide and feel into. I will say that orgasm, specifically in that early, 0 to 6 months postpartum, is incredibly repertory for our pelvic tissues. So that's just something to be said that this maybe by our biological design is not a moment where we're like not supposed to be sexual if orgasm is incredibly repertory and healing for prolapse and resupportive of our internal organs. So just a little physiological note there. But the idea that we are maybe not in our sexual prime, I think really does a lot and discourages a lot of women. So just wanting to say that there is not a that's not like laid in stone or laid in our tissues from a physiological perspective. Instead, yes, there are hormonal fluctuations that are happening during that menopausal and postpartum time, and we can be optimizing that through otherwise supportive lifestyle practices that are healthy and loving to our female bodies. And that as we give ourselves that added love and time, then, we do start to see really optimal hormonal fluctuations just like we would at any other time in our lives as women. It just might need more support during that time. Okay, so physiology, what else do we have to go through here that I just wanted to mention? Okay, here is the question I got in regards to this. Anal sex and lubrication. So yeah, I would say if there was a moment for artificial lubrication, anal sex could be one of them. That being said, it is absolutely not required. And I will say this truthfully, that when we do have adequate secretions and when there is adequate relaxation, I have spoken with and know many women and can share from personal experience that you can absolutely have easeful and pleasurable anal sex without artificial lubrication. It's totally possible. And of course, follow your body, do what feels good. I'm never telling women, specifically not you, what to do, but just the idea that, oh, it's true in all circumstances except for anal sex is a myth. And I just want to say that that does not have to be the case. So there's a lot more that I could say on this topic. And if you do have any questions or just want to know what can I do to be optimizing my hormonal blueprint, what can I do to be really creating the environment for my tissues to be supporting this natural creation of lubrication? How can I minimize fascial adhesions or maximize my circulation and my lymphatic flow in order for these glands to be really fed? How can I help my hormonal blueprint? How can I speak up during sex? How can I really feel like I know what's going on in my body and not be constrained by a lack of understanding in my physiology, a lack of trust in my body, or really these narratives that are, I would say, harmful to women overall? That's all stuff we get into in my women's work program. So if you're interested in learning more about your body and more about how having a clear physiological grounding extends into every aspect of our lives as women, and really how to talk about it and how to be promoting healthy emotional interactions, clear communication, and really physiologically based female thriving, that's the point of my women's work program. So if you want more about that, it's currently enrolling now. And if you're watching this later, you can still go check out um, all that information on my website. So I want to hear from you. If you have any thoughts or questions about this, please reach back out, comment, email, any of it, all of it. And again, you know what's needed for your body. You know what's needed in your sex life. Do what you know is best for you. And also let the takeaway be, when you support your hormonal blueprint, when you support your pelvic health, when you support your emotional health, when you support your communication skills, when you really honor where your body is at every stage of the way, there is no need for artificial lubricant for you to be at your optimal sexual best. All right.